Welcome to Biology Minds. Today we're going to talk about the crime scene pertaining to forensic science. So whenever we're doing an investigation, obviously we're dealing with a crime scene as far as criminalistics is concerned. The most important thing for the crime lab is any physical evidence. So yeah, you deal with a lot of eyewitness accounts, and in court you're going to have people testifying, but really what's important and what the forensic investigators are really looking for and what they really need to focus on is the physical evidence. What can they actually get and what can they send to the crime lab to test, because that is going to be solid, tangible evidence that in a lot of cases, a lawyer won't be able to fight about. If the physical evidence says something in particular, well, it'll be hard to kind of fight that. That's why fingerprints, DNA are so important, because ultimately, if the DNA matches, you're, beyond a reasonable doubt, you can say that that is definitely from that person. So you want that physical evidence in order to build your case. Obviously, one piece of physical evidence isn't going to do everything for you, but if you keep adding to your physical evidence, if you have a lot of physical evidence and all of it is pointing towards one person, well, that's how you build your case, and that's how you present your case to the jury and to the judge and prove that you know who the criminal that committed the crime was. So collectors of physical evidence must have an understanding of the crime labs. You're obviously going to make sure that they're well trained and they know how to collect things, what to look for, and how to package it and send it to the crime lab. So in some instances, you have specific collectors. In other instances, it's going to be the investigators or the police that are on the scene. But you want to make sure that they are trained in the techniques and they are capable, and there's no limitations. So investigators, they have to recognize that physical evidence is the most important. They understand that there are limitations to the physical evidence. It's not every piece of physical evidence is going to point directly towards a person, but you want to constantly add to the physical evidence and have as much physical evidence as possible in order to build your case. So properly preserving it for the laboratory examination is extremely important. If you don't package it or collect it properly and you send it to the lab, they're not really going to be able to do much with it, or the defense can use that to say that we have to throw this piece of evidence out. So, must be properly trained people. Either they're going to be specifically collectors, or they're going to be police officers or investigators that are constantly going through training for professional development, that are going to constantly be learning about what's the newest way and the best way in order to collect the samples properly, what to look for, how to collect it, how to package it, and how to send it to the lab. So you want to make sure that, first of all, when you get to a crime scene, you're securing the crime scene. You're not letting anyone in or out of the crime scene, and you're isolating that crime scene. So after getting medical assistance for anyone that's there, that's numero uno. All right, as soon as we get there, we're thinking that, hey, we want to secure this crime scene. But if anyone is there is hurt, obviously, if you have someone that, someone tried to hurt them or kill them and they're still alive, you need to first get medical assistance for them. But once you get medical assistance, once you call for that ambulance and once you secure them, you are going to want to secure that crime scene and isolate that crime scene, so that no one is allowed in, no one's allowed out. If there's any perpetrators that are still on the scene, you're going to arrest them, and then you got to rope off the whole area, barricade the whole area, and make sure that you position people in the correct spots so that they're keeping an eye on things. It becomes very difficult if your crime scene has a lot of entrances, exits, or if it's a very big crime scene. It's very hard to barricade an entire junkyard if you think that the entire junkyard is your crime scene. So it can be difficult, but you want to make sure that you're positioning your police cars in a certain manner and you're roping everything off, and you have guards or police officers standing guard in specific positions. So this can be very strategic. It's just chess, not checkers. You want to make sure that you're using your personnel wisely so that you can make sure that you secure and isolate that crime scene. Avoid any unauthorized personnel. There's always members of the press, friends, family, neighbors, and just rubberneckers or curiosity seekers that are going to come along and they want to kind of know what's going on. You want to make sure that they're not coming in tampering with your evidence with your crime scene, and that you're not letting any perpetrators out that might be trying to blend in and get away. So you would be surprised, how quick the press will get there, and how kind of flagrant the friends and the family will be, and neighbors. They'll be coming in, they'll be running in, they'll want to, see the body or console the person, even though the person has expired. So you want to make sure that they stay away. Okay, there's a time for them to see the body and for them to mourn, but it's not when you're trying to secure your scene and your evidence. It sounds kind of heartless, but you need this in order to catch the perp. So obviously, friends and family members, they might not understand right then and there, but ultimately they're going to want you to find that perpetrator and to prosecute that perpetrator. So in order to do that, you really need to secure your crime scene. So it's all about recording the scene. It should be done in its untouched state. You're not going to change. You're not going to move everything, change everything, start collecting everything before you start, recording. So you need to make sure that you have your photographer or one of the investigators take photographs. You're starting to do your rough sketch of your scene so that later you can create your smooth sketch. So remember, first we do our rough sketch, and then we are going to ultimately do our smooth sketch. So rough sketch is quick, and then our smooth sketch is beautiful. All right, we want it to look good so that we can present it to the court. This is what it looked like. This is where it is. Remember, the people, the jury, the judge, they don't get to see everything. They weren't there when it happened. They weren't there to collect evidence. You have to paint a picture for them. So you're going to use the photography, you're going to use the sketches, and you're going to use any notes that you can take down in order to paint a picture for them so that they understand what the situation was. Every situation is different. They weren't there. They might not understand. You need to paint the picture for them so that they can understand what happened. So you're taking photographs, you're doing your rough sketch so that later you can make your smooth sketch look pretty for the courtroom, and then you want to make sure you're taking any notes. Okay, notes are very important. They can be very useful later on. A lot of times you hear students or people just think, hey, I wouldn't need notes. I would remember exactly what happened because it would be crazy and it would stick out in my mind. But in reality, when you're dealing with a number of investigations as a police officer, as a detective, as an investigator, you're going to see that court cases don't come up very quickly. It might be a year or two until you have to actually testify. And by then, you don't remember as sharply as you think you would, and they might ask very specific questions. And that's where it's good to have detailed notes in order to go back and check your notes and say, yeah, well, I wrote down that this was like this, and this was like this, and this wasn't like this, and this wasn't like this, and you can be specific. So even though you think right then and there, hey, I'm going to remember everything, I'm going to remember it to a T, in reality, you really aren't. So you want to take detailed notes and make sure that you got your sketches down and that you take plenty of photographs. All right, photography at one time, it was very expensive to take a ton of photos, so you kind of took the most important photos and you try not to overdo it. Now with digital cameras, you can snap as many as you want away, and you just store it on your computer and you wipe it off of your digital camera, and there's the limitless amount of space for data. So you take all the pictures that you possibly can. We don't have that monetary issue anymore, but once upon a time they did. So, at the scene, you're going to want to photograph it in its unaltered state, unaltered condition. Physical evidence should be photographed at a 90-degree angle, meaning you're looking directly down on it, kind of like how you would take a picture of homework that you're cheating off of by standing right over it, getting that full picture so you can see it perfectly. You don't want an angle to it. You want to stand right over and take a picture of it. Obviously, you're going to take a picture from far away to get an idea of where in that scene that piece of evidence was, but then you want a close-up evidence. Usually you're going to put a ruler next to it or some type of measuring device so that the jury or other investigators can see how big that item was. New technology can merge images, so now we see that in the courtroom, they'll actually take a number of photos. If they take photos of the entire room, they'll actually use computer programs to merge these photographs, and then it kind of paints like a picture of the whole room, gives this big, long panoramic view of the entire crime scene, and then the judge and the jury can really see what the room looked like. But they're not going to really know the stuff that you know without you painting that picture and pointing things out in the photo and your sketches to them. With rough sketches, typically we're going to have an A-B line. So, the biggest wall in the room, you might say this is my A point, and then the end of the wall is my B point, and this was 40 feet long. And by saying that's 40 feet long, then people have a general idea of like how big this room was, how big was the partition in the part of the room. If in the room there was a little kitchenette area, you could say, oh yeah, this was the kitchenette area. It paints a picture of, oh, this is the kitchenette area, and this was where the door was, and the living area was this big, and it helps to also say, it was this far, this piece of evidence was this far from my AB line, this piece of evidence was this, the couch was this far from the AB line. So it's just kind of like a reference line or a reference points. The purpose, obviously orient everyone to the evidence and help you draw accurate measurements of the rest of the area. It can be done by the officer or the sketcher. Depends on how big your precinct is. Some precincts might have their own sketchers. Others, the officer is going to have to do the sketching, and they're going to do their rough sketch there, and then they're going to move on and do their smooth sketch. When you do your smooth sketch, even on your rough sketch, you want to make sure you have your compass on there so that you're drawing, hey, look, this area right here, that's facing north. Okay. Some people might put the whole compass where they say, this is west and this is east and this is south. But if you just put a line and you say this is north, all right, that's going to help people know that this room or this area, facing this way was north and this way was south, and so on and so forth. Any camera angles, you're going to put a triangle and you're going to use it almost like an arrow. So you're going to say, if I put one right here, I'd say, hey, look, this is the way that the camera was facing when I took a picture. So if this was your crime scene, you put one right here to say, hey, I took a picture of a crime scene from this angle, and then maybe I do another one like this. I took a picture of the crime scene from this angle, and it's just to show your camera angle so that you can refer to, hey, well, we took a picture right there. Where's that photo? What does it look like? You have to maintain a chain of custody as well. Chain of custody is where you are going to hand off your evidence from one person to the next. There's no time when evidence isn't secured by someone. You can't just leave it somewhere overnight and you come back to it, or it has to be taken care of and handled by someone at all times. So you start the chain of custody, you pass to the next officer signs off on it, gives it to the next officer, and then eventually it gets to the evidence locker where they're going to maintain it there. But you can't have a time where you just left it in a car overnight and then you took it to the evidence locker in the morning. You need to always have your eye on it, or some other officer has to have their eye on it. And your chain of custody, you're going to have a sheet that you fill out, and you're saying, I took care of it from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, and then this officer had it from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and then when our shift ended, we put it in the evidence locker, and they're going to say it's been in the evidence locker from 1 a.m. Till the judge, the courtroom needed it. So it's going to have the case number, it's going to have date, time, first officer, any other officers after it, sketcher, type of crime, victim, location. These are all of these things are going to be on your smooth sketch. And you need to include a scale because there's no measurements on your smooth sketch. You're going to put measurements on your rough sketch, but then when you move to your smooth sketch, you're doing everything by scale so that you can just use a ruler, look at it, and then you can convert it to how many feet it was in real life. You're also going to put weather conditions. Was it dry? Was it windy? No wind? Rainy? Whatever it may be. And then you're also going to indicate and show where entrances or exits are. If you have a wall and then there's a door here, you're going to show, hey, this is my door, and it swung open this way with a little arrow. Okay, so that'll show you a door to show people exactly where the door was and how the door was situated. This is a rough sketch. Obviously, you see this sketcher wrote all of the measurements so that later then they can draw it to scale. Right here it says, hey, this is not drawn to scale, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to draw it to scale. They have their legend, they have all their investigative information, and then they move on to their smooth sketch, which is going to be in ink. And you want to draw it to scale so that the courtroom can see it. The rough draft is really for you. You don't really need that in the courtroom, but you want it to help you make that smooth sketch. And smooth sketch is what the judge and the jury see, and it is there to paint a picture for them. Some people use templates in order to draw a nice little couch. And there's other drawing tools, drafting tools, CAD programs that they may use. This is a smooth sketch template that people might use if they want to draw a piano or a couch or something like that. They could use this nowadays. A lot of times they're gonna, if you have a sketcher for your department, they're just gonna use a CAD program, and they probably have something programmed into the CAD program where they say, hey, I need a 6-foot couch, and it comes up and they drop it in on their smooth sketch. Here is your smooth sketch where it is drawn to scale. Similar information, but it looks a lot prettier, and I can now take my ruler and I can measure everything out, and that's how I know how big everything is. By using the scale and converting it from 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, or 1/2 of an inch equals a foot, or 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, whatever the scale is, I can use that and say, oh, this line is this long and this line is this long, so on and so forth. So you see the differences between the rough sketch and smooth sketch. Once again, rough sketch is for you, final sketch is, or smooth sketch is for the courtroom. So crime scene notes written, they could be recorded audio. You want to save these, and you're going to use these in the future when you get called upon for your testimony. They're going to ask you questions, and you might have to refer back to your records, either before the testimony, or if during the testimony you could say, I can check my records if they ask something that you didn't look up on. But it's good to have, you really need it so that if 3 years from now there's something that they want to know about and they call you in, well, you're going to want to brush up on that file, brush up on your notes in order to remember exactly what happened that day. It could be a minor offense that you thought nothing of, but it ends up being something bigger, and your notes were important. Here are different search patterns. So a lot of times you'll see that in bigger areas you will use this quadrant type of search, where you're going to say, all right, this person's going to take care of this area, and you'll have this person take care of this area, and you'll have this person take care of this area. And you can, even if it's even a huge area, you can then break up your quadrants into even smaller quadrants. But that's for bigger areas. Smaller areas, you might, with one other person, you say, okay, let's walk side by side and try to kind of scope out this place and look for evidence, and you'll go like this, and while you're doing that, the next guy is going to go right along with you, and you guys are both going to be looking for physical evidence, or even more victims, whatever it may be. If you're by yourself, a good obviously when you're with someone else you can do this line search, but if you're by yourself, you might want to do, a good one is this grid search, so that you cover all the space, okay, and you're looking for everything, and you ultimately cut back and you really make sure that you're not missing anything. Something that is good to do if you know that there's a crime scene and you want to collect as much evidence and you don't want to tamper with any of the evidence, you start on the outside and you do this spiral search where you work your way inside. Okay, you really don't want to, obviously if you stumble upon a victim, then you can actually do this backwards where you work your way out and you start looking for evidence on the way out. But if you can avoid it, you would like to start on the outside and work your way inside, so that you're not taking any blood or soil samples from the crime scene and dragging it outward. You really want to go from the outside, work your way in, and try to find more evidence. But doesn't always happen. And then sometimes when you're looking for someone and you have numerous people that are helping you look for this individual, you say, all right, we're going to start right here and let's all split up, and that's where you see this ray search pattern. Physical evidence to be collected, victim's clothes, you're always going to use that because there's always tons of evidence on the victim's clothes, blood, hair, whatever it may be, fingernail scrapings, head and pubic hairs, blood, bullets recovered from the body, hand swabs of any gunshot residue, vaginal, anal, oral swabs, specifically, this pertains to a rape kit, all right, in sexually related crimes. Trace evidence should not be removed from garments, weapons, or other articles. The entire article should be submitted. So you don't want to try to take any evidence off of anything. You're not trying to extract any blood from a shirt. You're just going to send that whole shirt to the crime lab, and the crime lab is going to take care of it. So while envelopes are useful, they should be used for small particles or powders. That's, if you collect just that small particle or that powder. If there's something on a garment or a weapon, you are just sending that whole garment or weapon. Another thing to use is a druggist fold, where you're actually taking a piece of paper and you're folding it into itself so that it is sealed better than just an envelope where it can slip out of the side of the closing portion of the envelope. Clothing should be dried, placed separately in paper bags to increase airflow to prevent mold. So blood gets moldy if you try to put it in a sealed container. So you want to dry it as much as you can, the blood, and then you want to put it into a brown paper bag. And they'll have these big brown paper bags for you to collect them. Police officers will keep them in their cars, and you put an entire hoodie or jacket into these brown paper bags to create airflow so that the mold doesn't grow, and you can use this blood as physical evidence. Everything should be properly labeled, and remember, you're maintaining your chain of custody. Everything is being handed off to the next guy until it makes it to that evidence locker. Every moment of time must be accounted for. You can't say, oh, well, I went to the donut shop for half an hour. Oh, I went and got my nails done for 45 minutes. Okay, you can't do that. You have to pass it off to the next person. People must initial each time it's handed off, so that every moment of time is accounted for. You're going to collect substrate control. So if you have, these garments that have blood on them, you want to also collect garments that don't have blood on them to compare. All right. Collect unstained portions of materials if you're collecting sections of blood-stained materials. If you have this huge, giant curtain and you don't want to submit the entire curtain to the crime lab, all right, if you're just cutting out a big portion of that curtain, make sure you're also including portions of that curtain that doesn't have any blood on it, so you can kind of compare. Well, we found formaldehyde on the blood. Well, was there formaldehyde on the entire curtain, or was it just in that blood, and that's why it was on that curtain? The Fourth Amendment is, we talk about that when we talk about crime scenes, because it's all about search and seizures. So value evidence does not go to waste upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So it's all about legal search and seizures. When can you search and seize? When can you not? So emergency circumstances, you can search without a warrant to prevent destruction of evidence. If you know that someone is somewhere destroying evidence, you can go into a building that you don't have a warrant for, and you can stop them from destroying the evidence. Search of a person or property within the immediate control of the person, which will lead to a lawful arrest. So, a lot of times you hear about people are doing drugs or something, and they, cops come up, they put it in their pocket, and they're like, you can't search me. This is, well, they have probable cause, and now it's a warrantless search. They know that they are going to arrest you when they take that pipe out of your pocket, or that syringe or whatever it may be out of that pocket. So, and ultimately it does lead to a lawful arrest, because they did just see with their own eyes. As much as people try to deny, nah, you didn't see what, nah, it didn't happen like that, it wasn't like that. They're going to search you, and then it leads to a lawful arrest. So that's an excellent example of a warrantless search. And then if the person gives consent, if you invite them in, we always hear about people saying, don't ever let cops in your house, don't ever let cops in your house. I mean, if you have nothing to hide, I guess let cops in your house. But for the most part, you don't want to give them any consent, because then they can search as much as they want. And, if they find evidence, then you can't really come back and say, well, they didn't have a warrant. Well, they didn't need a warrant because you gave them consent. And a famous court case that we talk about is MINCEY versus Arizona, which ultimately established that any evidence in plain view while searching during an emergency may be seized. So if the fire department comes in and they happen to see some evidence of something, they can actually use that evidence. So you don't need a warrant because you saw something while there was a fire. The fire department went in because there was a fire, there's an emergency situation, and they ultimately saw this evidence, and you're now able to seize that. Another court case that we talk about is Michigan versus Tyler. This is a big one. It established that if property was accessed in the event of emergency, such as a fire, subsequent searches must have a warrant. So there was this case, Michigan versus Tyler, where Tyler had this piece of property. It burned down. All right, the Michigan law enforcement, they went there, they collected as much evidence, and then they said, you know what, let's go back and get more evidence. And then subsequent days, they continued to go on and get more evidence, and they found out that is unconstitutional. You can't just, it's not just an open crime scene for the remainder of its days. You need to then get a warrant after that point. So you can, while you're there for the emergency, it burning down, you put out the fire, and then you collect a lot of evidence, so nowadays you're going to collect as much evidence as you can to prove that it was arson or whatever you think it was, and then move on from there. But if you didn't collect all the evidence, then you need a warrant. So in this case, they did not get a warrant, and they had to throw out all of that evidence from the subsequent searches. Modus operandi, or modus operandi, it refers to method or procedure. So a lot of times they'll talk about the method of procedure of a serial killer. Their modus operandi is when they always leave a scarf around the woman's neck, or they always cut off the guy's feet. All right, that's his MO. That's his modus operandi. That's the way that he does things. So when we talked about eyewitnesses and being good for testifying, you see that their modus operandi, their way of doing things, has to involve sitting up straight, being a good speaker, and knowing the facts. When we talk about for criminals, it's like the way that they commit the crime. So based on statistical correlation and probability that crimes exhibit a certain and consistent style will be committed by the same individual or group. So we can use that to kind of not pin, but to explain to the judge or the jury, hey, he must have also done, or she must have also done, all these other crimes. So, however, there's always the possibility that that observation of the same style is from a copycat. So we hear about that a lot of times, where there was a bomber, and then other people started setting off bombs too, and we have people calling in bomb threats saying that they're that person. So there's always copycats, but a lot of times you see that they are able to kind of create a network to understand who committed a crime. So for a warrantless search, remember, emergency, all right, if it's going to prevent destruction or loss of evidence, search a person or property within the immediate control of that person, and then if you give consent. Those are big ones. Those are the big four. Personnel that can apply a warrant, that's going to be a police officer, district attorney, public servant. But in order to issue a warrant, you need the court to do so, which is the judge is going to sign off on a search warrant. So you can't have a lawyer sign off on it. You can't have a cop say, "Oh, I just signed the search warrant. I'm issuing the search warrant." That's not how it does. So they're issued to the police officer, and then the police officer or detective, they're going to carry out the search warrant. But the officer has to be in the court's jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is a big thing. You can't have a warrant for New York from a judge in Michigan. It just doesn't work like that. They have their own specific jurisdiction. So you need to get that warrant from a judge in that jurisdiction. So warrants allow for searches involving designated property, premises, designated vehicles, and or designated people. They're very specific. They're going to say what property, where on the property, what vehicles. They're not just going to say, yeah, whatever you think is appropriate when you get there. It's going to say, this property. You can't say, oh, well, it turns out that he also hung out with his neighbor a lot, so we're going to also search his neighbor's property. No, you can only search his premises, and a lot of times they'll be as specific as saying, oh, that premises and the shed in the back and his 2 cars. So Fourth Amendment, just a reminder, it's really to protect the citizen so that warrantless searches aren't served on innocent people or people that don't deserve to have warrants served on them. So the beliefs or the premises for probable cause that require a warrant: if physical evidence is stolen, unlawfully possessed, or is or was used with the intent to commit a criminal act, then this is probable cause to obtain a warrant. Okay, you need probable cause. You can't just say, oh, this guy's a bad guy, or oh, we don't like this guy, or he committed crimes in the past. That's not probable cause. You need something that is going to tell the judge, hey, this is why we're going to search. We know that this, and this, and we need to go in there and get more evidence so that we can throw this guy or this woman in jail. Types of courts that can issue warrants: obviously not civil courts, not family courts, but criminal courts. Okay, district courts, circuit courts, Supreme Court. Remember, jurisdiction is a big thing. You can't have the New York District Court or Circuit Court serving warrants for or issuing warrants for California. Time restraints: 10 days between issuance, obviously, or usually you're going to see that the police officers want specific dates and times, and they're going to specify that for the judge, and they're going to make sure that they have those specific days and times written down. But you can't, it's not just a warrant for whenever you want till the end of time. It's for a specific 10-day period, and it's usually between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. or 2100 hours. And you're going to see that sometimes it's not in that time, and they have to request that from the judge, and it's going to be specific on the warrant. We saw a number of years ago when we had the feds collaborate with the City of Newburgh Police in order to crack down on the gangs. They wanted to go in at 3 a.m. So that warrant would have specified, hey, these cops aren't going between 6 and 9. They're going at 3 a.m. because that's when things start to quiet down and they go back to their homes. They saw that they're selling drugs, and you're not going to catch them between 6 o'clock and 9 p.m. because they're out doing things, and that's when they might be carrying firearms, and that's when they're going to be expecting things. So we want to get them at 3 a.m. when they stop selling those drugs at 2, and when they kind of go back to their families from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. to kind of get some rest before they get right back to it. So they hit them at 3 a.m. and they surprised them all, and they were all dead tired from hustling all day, and that's the way that they did it. But in that warrant, it would have specified, hey, they're not going between 6 and 9, they're going at 3 a.m., and that's when they're going to hit them between this time span, 10-day time span. Info that must be on the application: name of the court and the judge, name of the officer that requests the warrant, specific location to be searched, and then the reason for the search or the premise for the search, and suspected evidence to be found. Really, as much information as you can give to the judge so that the judge knows that he's issuing, the warrant for the right reason. Serving the warrant: if the officer is denied access for the search, then they do not have to give notice of entry. So if you're telling him, no, you can't come in, no, you can't come in, and he has a warrant, well, he can just come in at that point. If the location is unoccupied, then the officer does not have to give notice of any entry. They can just go in. Right? If you're not home, they don't wait for you to come home. They have a warrant. They can go right in. You have to try to identify yourself. You can't just go in there and if a person's on the front lawn, you can't start busting through the door. You do approach the person and say, hey, I'm Officer so-and-so. Here's my ID. This is the warrant. We're going in right now. You don't really have to ask them, can we go in? But you're going to say, hey, I'm a cop. I'm not just, some guy coming up trying to break into your house. Use of physical force is warranted. All right, people don't think so, but it is if, the individual declines, and deadly force is warranted when the officer's life is threatened. So serving search warrants, they can actually kill people if the officer's life is threatened. If you are getting shot at during while serving a warrant, well, you don't just take it and say, well, it is their house. Deadly force is warranted. Seize property: you're going to have receipts to search property. Itemized and describes the property, starts the chain of custody. So just like any evidence, anything that you're taking from the property, you have to start a chain of custody, and you have to have an itemized list of what you took so that everything is returned back to the person. Everything that isn't returned becomes evidence, and you start that chain of custody. So they can't just take everything and then go, oh yeah, we lost this, so I don't know where this is, I don't know if we took this, what we took. They're there's a system to it, and it has to have, it has to be itemized and describe the property that is being seized.